Hello, Master Gardener trainees. This is vegetable gardening, part one of, I believe, 5 parts in all. So stay tuned for all of them. When I usually do this class in person, I start off with this question. How many of you are hoping to save money in growing your own vegetables? Inevitably, about half to three-quarters of the hands will go up. Well, here's a new book for you called The $64 Tomato. By the time you spend money on some of the things that you may need for vegetable gardening, from soil improvement, rototillers, stakes, and all sorts of things, your tomato may end up costing that, is kind of the gist and the pun in this book title. It's actually a kind of a funny look at gardening. I've yet to read it. Maybe one of you has a copy you're willing to lend to me. Good thing about this book, it's now in paperback, so it won't cost you nearly as much to purchase it. I put this picture in there to get you to drool a little bit and go, wow, vegetables aren't such bad looking plants, especially when they're well maintained like this. It's one of the prettiest vegetable gardens I've seen. So hopefully that'll get you a little stimulated into growing some vegetables in your yard at some point in the future. Site selection is important. Obviously, you want to have it near a water source so you don't have to lug a lot of water around. Vegetables will need watering from time to time when we're not getting regular rain. And since we vegetable garden we flip it around, we usually vegetable garden fall through to the early part of summer. That's usually when our rainy season is over. Full sunshine is required for most vegetables, at least greater than 5 to 6 hours. At 5 to 6 hours, some of these vegetables that are really fruit producing, we know what a fruit is, right? Something that contains seeds inside, like a tomato, a pepper, things like that. They need even more than 5 or 6 hours. 8 hours is really best for those fruit producing vegetable crops. Obviously, you don't want root competition from trees or shrubs. That would be very unpleasant gardening and not easy to dig in. And of course, a tree or shrubs would be robbing your vegetable garden of water and nutrients. Now, this may sound funny. Well-drained soil. Most of you are gardening probably in sand. Where I live in Brooksville, I'm gardening in clay. So I do have the opposite problem with drainage. No, that's not my backyard picture, but my backyard has looked like that from time to time during the rainy season. Even without a named wind event blowing through the berg, it sometimes pools water. Consider the light conditions August through June. Notice how I kind of cross-linking what I said just a few minutes ago with this slide. Let's look at the picture of the vegetable garden, and we can see some banana trees in the back as well. Now, that's a more or less full sun at this particular time of day on this particular time of the year. I don't know when this picture was taken. But let's say that vegetable garden is in the sun in July or June. Will it be sunny in December or January when the shadows will be longer from those trees that are behind our back here in this particular photograph? So keep that in mind when you're siting the garden, because we're going to be gardening from August through till about June. We take a rest in mid-June till about the end of August. It's just too darn hot for most vegetables to survive Florida's heat and humidity and heavy rainfall. There are some exceptions I'll talk about later in the modules. Green tip. Gardens don't always have to be in the backyard. Now, if you're in a deed-restricted community with covenants, deeds, and restrictions, they may have a restriction to the backyard and something like that. But even many of these communities, you can integrate it in ways where people don't even realize are vegetable gardening. You could do it in containers or hanging baskets, as you can see in the upper left-hand photograph. There are some leafy greens, whether those are mixtures of lettuces, herbs, or something like that. It's ornamental and it's edible. So there's one way to kind of get around those covenants, deeds, and restrictions, and no one's going to complain. I like this particular picture of the pansies and the red leaf lettuce, the upper right hand photograph. They're both cool season plants, and they could be grown on a patio or heck by your front door. No one will probably complain. Now, screening your neighbor with corn, that's a pretty novel way of doing that. Again, that probably is limited for most of us to do such a thing like that. And remember, corn does have a lot of insects that will want to eat it. So it's one of those crops I would generally avoid growing as a home vegetable gardener. The lower right-hand picture is couple of families somewhere in the Pacific Northwest where they're very more green-minded or more environmentally minded and rip out lawns and replace everything with edible crops for their front, side, and backyards. If you can get all your neighbors on board in your community, great, but that probably won't happen for most of us. And if you rip out all your ornamental plants and just have vegetables, you probably will get your HOA in an uproar. Just my guess. Don't try it without getting their written permission. Remember that from our FFL? Green tip. Organic matter is a secret to good vegetable gardening. Organic matter has binding sites, as I talked about in the soils module, to hold on to the nutrients and water in our sandy soils. Also, it helps improve drainage in the clay soils by breaking up the heavy clay. So it's magical in that it can do two different things in different soil types. Again, think of organic matter, compost, etc., as a soil conditioner. Compost is not fertilizer. A lot of people who get into vegetable gardening or organic vegetable gardening think compost is their fertilizer source. If you think compost is your fertilizer source, you're going to have problems growing vegetables. As I mentioned, organic matter improves water holding capacity, especially in our sandy soils. It improves that nutrient holding capacity with their binding sites, those little nooks and crannies for the nutrients to stick or stay put and not leach or run off so easily. Yet it improves the drainage in clay soils, as I mentioned already. It supplies nutrients, yes, but it's slow release. And that's the key to why compost or organic matter is not fertilizer. It's the release of the nutrients is so slow that it's not enough quantity during the cropping of your various vegetables. Organic matter also increases what we call the soil's life. When I was an undergrad in college, I had a soil science class, and my professor was from Ireland, Dr. Johnny Hartkin, and he said, "Why did the Pilgrims come to America?" And students were saying, from famine, Irish potato famine, and things like that. He said, "Oh, that's blah blah blah. I can't repeat it here on this recording. I'll let you figure that out." And I said, "They wore out the soil." And he said, "That's exactly right, Mon." And he was so funny. Anyhow, when you overcrop and you don't improve the soil, it quote unquote wears out. It needs to be conditioned with organic matter. Also, organic matter releases organic chemicals. The C word again. The C word again. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. No, calm down. These organic chemicals do various wonderful things in the soil. In some cases, they may feed the microorganisms that are beneficial to plants. In other cases, these organic chemicals may inhibit nematodes, which are parasitic, microscopic, worm-like creatures that are very common in our Florida sandy soils. So organic chemicals are not necessarily a bad thing. Most people who vegetable garden will turn to raised beds for various reasons. First of all, you're only working the soil in the bed in the raised bed and not where you're walking in between the rows. So that means less need for input of organic matter. It just is going into the raised bed and not in the walkway and the aisles. Also, most of our roots of our vegetables only go down about 6 to 12 inches, so you can have this wonderful rich soil for them to do their thing and grow better. The soil doesn't compact as easily because you're walking between the beds in the rows and not walking on top of the soil that you're cropping. Also makes for easier crop rotation. If we look at not the first bed on the lower right hand side of the photograph, but the second one you can see is broccoli. And in that bed over to the extreme right of the photograph are cabbage. Both are in the same family. In fact, they're cabbage and broccoli are the same genus and species. It's how we've bred and selected for the various characteristics within that genome to get the divergence of characteristics. Kind of like dog breeding, big, small, fat, stocky, you name it. So that cabbage family, Brassicaceae, is in that second bed from the bottom of the slide. So next year I would put the Brassicaceae in the bed, the third bed up in the slide right in the middle, which appears to be onions, alliums, and I can't tell what the leafy things are, but let's say those are beets. Well, that's a whole different family as well. So you can see where you could easily keep crop rotation going much more easily in a system like this. Now, some of us in gardening, as we get older, it's hard to get down to the ground. And actually, I don't find it's hard to get down to the ground. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting back up. Gravity's working against me. And some people just have other physical limitations for getting down on to garden. So beds can be raised up to where you can garden much more easily, like this gentleman can in his motorized chair. This is also good for people that just have bad backs or whatever, or bad knees or hips. You just don't have to get down as much. Now the downfall of that taller bed is you're going to need more amendments to get enough soil volume. Soil preparation is important for good vegetable gardening. If you're taking virgin land, you want to clear it of debris, sod, plant material, etc. Usually we do this with rototilling. Cultivate the soil. You don't need a rototiller, but it sure makes life easier. You can do it with a digging fork. I have done it with a digging fork in hard clay in Wisconsin, and it's quite miserable. I highly recommend a rototiller. Just as a side note, if you're thinking of purchasing a rototiller, my recommendation is for a rear tine rototiller. If you go to the store or online, you'll see some have the tines up front, away from where you're standing, and some have it in the back. The ones they have in the front drag you all around and are quite hard on your shoulders, back, and neck. Those with a rear tine dig into the soil much better and are much easier to maneuver and do a heck of a lot better job of cultivating the soil than a front tine. At the point of tilling the soil, you can add organic matter. Now, some of us have compost piles. This is the time to put the compost in. If you don't have compost, you may want to amend it with purchase composted manures. There's cow manure composted, there's chicken, there's other animal manures that are available. Worm castings could be used as well. They typically are fairly pricey to purchase, however. Stay away from buying topsoil. Why do I say that? Well, topsoil varies in many people's definition. There is no legal definition of what is topsoil, so it'll vary in its texture and its quality. But topsoil, I can guarantee, will bring a whole bunch of new weed seeds to your party, and they will grow in your new vegetable garden. Trust me, don't do that. Do a soil test. This is the time to test the soil and see if the pH needs to be adjusted. Sometimes we have to add lime. Other times it's best not to fiddle with pH if we don't know what it is. Let's do some review of soil pH. We kind of remember that from the soils module, don't we? All right, which side of the scale is acidic? In this one, we have 4.5 to 8 in this particular diagram. So 4.5 is that the acid side or the alkaline side? Think a moment. 4.5 is very acidic. So that's the acid side of the soil. A pH of 7 would be considered neutral. That doesn't mean it's perfect for all plants to grow in, it just is neutral by definition of pH. Now pH of 8 is very alkaline. What does lime do when you add it to the soil? Does it make it more acidic or more alkaline? Well, what is lime generally speaking? It's calcium carbonate, although there are a few other forms of lime out there that aren't just calcium carbonate. But we won't go into the details right here in this module. So lime is calcium carbonate. It's also known as chalk. And if you've ever taken a Tums or that kind of an antacid with calcium carbonate and it tastes chalky, it's because you've just ingested some chalk with some peppermint flavoring or other flavoring and some sugar to make the medicine go down. The medicine go down. Just a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. All right, enough of my singing there. Anyhow, the point I'm trying to make is adding lime will make the soil more alkaline. What pH do most plants, including vegetable plants, want to be? Do we remember that from our soils module? Think about that for a second. Most plants want to be on the acidic side of the pH scale, somewhere between about 5.5 to about 6.5. So 5.5 to 6.5 is pretty much the sweet spot for the vast majority of plants that we will grow in our gardens, whether it's vegetable gardens, ornamentals, etc. Another form of lime that I was alluding to is dolomitic lime. That also will supply some magnesium in the mix. It's just a slightly different form of calcium. What if the soil is too alkaline? You can add sulfur. You may have heard about that, and I think we did talk a little bit about that in the soils module. Problem with sulfur is it is used by soil bacteria as a kind of a food source of sorts, and in the process they make sulfuric acid. That acid is what is lowering the pH. Once the soil sulfur is used up, the pH will start creeping right back up to where it was to begin with. So if it's too alkaline to begin with, sulfur probably will not fix your problem. And manures. Here's another source for organic matter. This is kind of a review from composting as well. We only use manures from vegetarian animals. In other words, your cat litter box is not a good idea to go into a compost pile or a vegetable garden. I know someone just went ew out there in cyberland, but I've been asked many times over the years, can I put that in my garden or compost it? Especially cat feces has potential to transmit a disease to us called toxoplasmosis. I couldn't tell you all the details about it, but it's a nasty thing to get. It damages your brain. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but the point is, don't do it. Your dog is not a vegetarian creature, so don't compost dog manure. Now, horses are vegetarian, cows are vegetarian, things like that. And you may know somebody that has a horse farm or dairy cows or something like that, or cows, and you can get that manure. But remember, depending on what these animals are eating, you may end up with a lot of weevils coming into the party. So I generally recommend that you compost it if you're getting it, and compost hot, where you're getting the temperature of the pile to about 140 or so. And here, the upper left-hand picture is a good example of a rear tine rototiller. Rather than the tines being kind of underneath where the motor is, it's behind the motor. It's a much better balanced system. And no, your feet aren't going to go underneath. The guard does a great job, and the handle is plenty long enough. If you get your foot under there, you've done something stupid. We'll leave it there. And picture on the upper right, there's just a pile of well-rotted or composted or decomposed manure of some sort. Here they're showing in the lower left-hand picture taking a soil sample. It should really be a paper bag, but again, for collection, a plastic bag will work, but you would then put it into the soil sample bag, which is paper, so it will dry. If your soil tests tell you need to add lime, here is the gentleman in the lower right hand picture liming the soil. A lot of times it's done by hand. I usually try to do it with a fertilizer spreader. I highly recommend wearing a dust mask. You can see it's as fine as talcum powder most of the time. There is pelletized lime. It looks like grains of salt. It just takes a lot longer for it to neutralize or change the pH, but it's a little easier to use and not choking down dust. And here it is with the manure spread out. It could be tilled in, and then this could be cropped. Now, if the manure is fresh, you want to wait about 3 to 4 months before cropping. This is especially true if the vegetables are, in contact with, or the part you're going to eat is in contact with the soil, like lettuce, for example. That's going to be right down there in the manure compost. Whereas corn is going to be up in the air, wrapped in a husk, and quite well protected from any bacteria or fungal issues that may exist in that particular manure. So keep that in mind. Before planting, add as much as you can. If you can get that kind of manure source, 25 to 100 pounds per 100 square feet, great, do it. You're still going to need to supplement with fertilizer, even in organic gardening. Yes, there are organic fertilizers available for purchase even at the local big box chain stores. You know the ones I'm talking about. They're usually painted orange or blue. After planting, we generally recommend not a whole lot of manure additions, especially in crops that you're going to be in close contact with the composted manure. Keep that in mind. There is potential for bacterial things, E. coli, for example. Let's conclude the first part of this vegetable gardening module. Join me in part 2.